Hello, and we are back. We just need to stop numbering these. Real Talk 38? Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, 37. But I
But
feel like we've said
no, we
37 the
keep
past
saying that.
three episodes, but we're
Okay,
forever 37. I don't know. I feel like we've
maybe
said that the last three episodes.
yeah, maybe we'll suspend the numbering system.
Yeah, I think it might be best.
But we are so glad to be here together, and we are talking about a subject that really affects all of us at some point. None of us are immune to this, and we are going to be talking burnout and when it can feel like you are running on empty. So we really want to make this episode for any of y'all who might be feeling overwhelmed, feeling exhausted, feeling stuck, or yeah, when you just I literally on a meeting today was like, oh, I got a case of the Mondays. And there's no shame in that. There is no shame in burnout. Our goal today is to really normalize this conversation and hopefully give some helpful tips for if you're finding yourself burned out. But most importantly, just remembering to be kind to yourself because burnout has nothing to do with a lack of compassion, with a lack of passion, with a lack of being an absolute like badass professional. Burnout is the way that am I allowed to say swear words? Well, whatever. Burnout is the way that our brains work.
Yeah.
And we'll, of course, be talking self care, but remembering that self care is not indulgent. Self care is what keeps you functioning. And hopefully, we just have a great conversation about that today. I'm going to stop babbling. Turn it over to you, Jesse.
All right. Now, yes, burnout. So a lot of people say, what is burnout? So it's more than just feeling tired or stressed. Burnout is a state of emotional, physical, and mental exhaustion caused by prolonged stress. It's almost like your batteries are drained, but you can't recharge, or your cup is half full and you can't get it back up to full. That's what burnout kind of feels like. So it affects everything.
And it can affect everyone. I mean, of course, there are high rates of burnout in help giving professions because you are, kind of extending so. But I mean, any profession, any job, any volunteer opportunity, being a person is going to come with stress, which means that you can have burnout. So I want to talk just like a little bit about kind of what we mean by this, that stress can cause burnout. And that is that, buzz topic right now being cortisol and cortisol levels and how that affects us as humans. And but just a gentle reminder that cortisol in and of itself is not bad. Cortisol is our stress hormone in our brain, our stress response. So of course we need that activated in high stress situations or we need our fight or flight response activated because we are in physical danger. It kind of gives you that adrenaline, that oomph. But you get like little bits of cortisol from like your coffee in the morning, from working out, just the act of waking up can give you a cortisol boost. So it's our stress response, but remembering that stress doesn't always mean negative stress.
Right.
So we're supposed to have cortisol going on in our brains. When cortisol can lead us into these areas of burnout is when cortisol becomes toxic stress. And cortisol, like predominance in our brain, is only supposed to happen for about 20 minutes. And then our brain wants to balance that with like a feel good neurotransmitter, something like serotonin, oxytocin, dopamine, all of those good things. And we do lots of stuff throughout the day to give our brains balance to that. Like you can have like a disagreement with a coworker, let's say, and you recognize that you're feeling up, you're feeling stressed about it, or maybe you're feeling angry. So you take a pause and you go outside and you and like take a deep
Right.
exhale and kind of like grunt it out or what have you. Like that right there is a full cycle of balancing your brain. Um, but when we're being real about it, like we just don't always have time for that, especially when we start to get really stressed. So, what can happen is that we'll have prolonged cortisol release without any sort of like balancing neurotransmitter. And that balance comes from the stuff like getting enough sleep, eating healthy food, moving your body, releasing the tension, being sure your breathing is regulated, all of that good stuff. So when we don't have the time for that kind of like self-care, self-maintenance, and we get that prolonged cortisol release, that's when that can become toxic stress. And it's called toxic stress because it will actually diminish the blood volume in a part of your brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. I love that I just have that memorized. But the anterior cingulate cortex is the part of your brain that usually filters your reality with your sensory information to tell your brain when fight or flight needs to be activated. So, when this atrophy occurs, this reduction in blood volume because of prolonged cortisol release, which again can come just from everyday stress and not having the time to balance it out or cope through it, um, your brain will stop activating fight or flight based upon your sensory information and will actually put you into fight or flight mode because of learned information or past information. So you can go, that is what burnout is actually our fight or flight response being activated. And that can present in a lot of different ways. But this atrophy, this blood reduction is not permanent. Like when we take the time for self care, when you take the time to notice, I have burned out, I've gone into crisis, I'm in fight or flight, however you want to self define it, they all mean the same thing. Sympathetic nervous system dominance, that you just need to pause and you need to balance out your neurotransmitters. You need to take some time for some deliberate self maintenance and understanding what emotions you've had going on that maybe you've been cramming down, which for most of us with burnout specifically is going to be like anxiousness, you know?
Right,
Um, and again, just from being tired, that's a stress on our brain too, and not having the time for those good self care activities. So we know our fight or flight response can present in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always just look like us literally fighting something or running away, you know?
right.
So when you're looking at something like chronic fatigue, decreased productivity, cynicism. Like that can be your burnout response. That can be your fight or flight response. And then even looking at like physical symptoms, like if you're getting headaches, if you're feeling withdrawn from activities or relationships, you know, that can be your freeze response. That can be your flight response where you just feel like I can't get up. I don't want to do anything, even my like personal activities that I normally enjoy. So if you're nodding along and you're thinking, like, yeah, I've been there. And by the way, everybody listening to this has been here. Burnout is not
Right.
a sign of weakness. It's not even a sign of not taking care of yourself. Just stuff piles up sometimes.
Yeah.
Um, we hopefully have some good go-to strategies for you. But, you know, we always encourage you here, trust your gut, know what works for you. But we'll just talk about some strategies overall that we know can help with burnout.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned like it looks different on everybody. Like for me, like I've noticed like sometimes like I wake up at 3 a.m. and I just cannot shut off my brain. I know that's burnout. I feel like I'm running on empty a lot, or it took me a lot to realize like how to prioritize self-care, but like I'll notice like I'll just like get up and I'll be exhausted and I like sometimes I just cry. I'll cry for no reason, like legit, and like nothing's wrong. And then, I'm very passionate about work, and we love our company, we love our job, and I'm just I don't know what's wrong. And, it took me a long time to realize like that was me being burnt out. And I remember like, of course, I'm in therapy as well. So, shout out to my therapist. My therapist told me, you fought and stayed in flight, fight or flight for so long that your body, I really struggled with, learning how to get out of that mode just because of, I just didn't realize how burnt out I was, like how exhausted I was. Like, yeah, I felt fatigue. I felt, but I don't know why I was convinced that that was just normal. That was just life and there was nothing you could do about it. So I'm really glad that you mentioned like when you can recognize certain symptoms because I think a lot of people, they sometimes just overlook it. Like, I'm just tired today. And then the next day they're like, I'm just, frustrated. But a lot of it usually turns out to be your levels of cortisol, like you were saying, is very high. And it's just in that fight or flight mode. And you're really just burnt out.
Yeah, like I think you know, basically any time where you find yourself like feeling like you don't have the energy to do things you normally enjoy or like you don't want to, like that's a lot of the time my indication to me that I've like reached that burnout stage. Cause like I'm pretty extroverted, but my response with burnout a lot is to be like, I don't want to leave my bed. I don't want to leave my
Hmm.
house. Like, and then that creates kind of a bad cycle for me because then I'm not getting that like replenishment that I usually like really enjoy from like being social and things like that. So
Yeah.
it can be a tough cycle to get out of. And I think really important to recognize. I usually go one of two ways. And it's always dramatic, if you can imagine that. But it's like, I don't want to leave the house. I don't want to leave the bed. Not that that's wrong. Like, give yourself rest days. That's
Right.
important. But when I notice that, like, it's like, oh, this is at the expense of me, like, filling my cup up with, like, being with friends or being with family and things like that. Or I am just like so quick to have escalated emotions, like escalated like irritation or just bursting into tears. So when I find myself like I'm bursting into tears because like my husband bought a different brand of ginger ale. That's a real story. Then I'm like, okay, we've got too much stress going around, and like that's how
Right.
my burnout will present itself a lot of the times. It's a lot of crying, but that's just kind of my go-to. And I think I've been so glad that like in the behavioral health field, there's been so much more attention to burnout, not just for us to be paying attention to as like professionals and volunteers, but for us to be able to break it down and explain
Right.
it that like this is just the way your brain functions, and it has nothing to do with it that it means that you've slacked too much on your self-care or anything like that. Like stuff piles up at times. I mean, y'all know I've been having a doozy of a year with the fertility stuff and then moving
Yeah.
and all of that. And it just happens. And so I think, one of the biggest things that we can do for ourselves is kind of find your patterns. It's not the funnest thing to explore because you
Yeah.
usually don't love the way that your burnout presents itself, but like find your patterns and then find what works for you to deal with it. Like it's still an ongoing journey for me to like balance the amount of like staying home to give myself rest versus kind of like, okay, we need to like overcome this stress response and like go out, go do something, and things like that. Because I can find for myself like that can like continue my burnout if I'm staying home too much.
Yeah.
Like I'm just like I'm not actually revitalizing my brain. I'm not balancing out my stress hormone. I'm like increasing it. And again, that's why it's so personal and different for everybody. And there
Mm.
is no like right or wrong way. It's just figuring out what works for you and your body. I tell this story all the time when I'm training on burnout or crisis that it's like one time um I was trying to get out the door for something for work and I was not even running late. I was just trying to leave. And I like dropped a cup of water. And like not a glass, a cup, nothing broke. I didn't even have carpet, like no mess. This is water. And I burst into tears,
Hmm.
and like I think I even like had to call Lavandra, our CEO, and be like, I gotta be done for the day. Like, and so just remembering that burnout and like coping and self-care isn't always for like what happens to us. Something big doesn't have to happen to you. I didn't need to figure out how to cope with dropping a cup of water. I needed to pause and be like, what have you not been dealing with? And there was a lot of anxiety I was not dealing with. So, like taking that time to really have the courage because it's not always easy and the strength to like look internally and be like, what's going on? What have I not been dealing with? And it might be nothing except just everyday stress. Something big does not have to be going on with you for the stress to just pile up and you don't have time for that good self-maintenance and burnout happens.
Yeah, I definitely agree because there's been a few times where like nothing like major is wrong. Like, like I'm just like something happens. Like I know like a couple months ago we had a lot going on and like I was trying to feed my cat and my cat knocked over its bowl as soon as I put the food in there. Not a big deal. It literally went into the sink. And I was just like I just started crying. And I was just like I'm thinking in my head, like, what is wrong with me? Like, it's not a big deal. And I was just like, that's exhaustion. Like, that's burnout. Like, my body's just, it's done. Like, it just needs to rest. And I'm glad that you said that, like staying home for some people it it can make it worse because I definitely agree because like by the time like I have my off days, like that's all I kind of want to do is just sit at home and like my wife is very like, let's go do this, let's go do that because we have the same off days usually. And at first I'm always like, no, I don't want to. But then when I get out and do it, I've noticed a change like and like being happier or like it's almost like you kind of got to push through it. So I do think it's important that you said that about like just kind of having it's not fun because like for the most part most people you just want to sleep or just be in bed. So I think it's important to know like sometimes when you don't feel like doing like the things that you would find fun, and you actually start to do them, like I've noticed I felt a lot better like afterwards. I was like, like I'd get home. I'd be like, I'm really glad I went to, we went to those few stores and I walked around and had a
Yeah.
coffee, and I do feel better. Like I feel better, and um, so I do think like recharging and like trying to prevent burnout is important. Like schedule downtime, plan activities like you said that bring you joy, practice mindfulness, and presence. Focus on the moment, get enough sleep, eat good meals, move your body. I think all that's really important because I think that that does help. Even if you feel so fatigued, like you're just like, I don't have the energy. Maybe you could give yourself 10 minutes of something. I remember when I was in school for psychology and we talked a lot about self care and burnout and stuff. My professor told me, he said, as dumb as it sounds, he was like, if you could give yourself 5 minutes of something that you truly enjoy, even if it's reading one chapter of your book or listening to your favorite song or, baking chocolate chip cookies, whatever you can give yourself time. He was like, when you lay down at night, like you had that moment of, oh, yeah, today was a little rough because of A, B, and C, but I did get to enjoy D. Like D was fun. Like it was good. Like I did have that moment where I had self-care or I did get to take a relaxing bath. And he also said, try to think more like that. Like when you're, feeling burnt out and you're exhausted, he always said just give yourself the least amount, like 5 minutes. And he said it really will help, with being burnt out or getting through burnt out or realizing you're burnt out. So I think it really is important. Like I know we talk about self-care almost every episode, but I think it's one of the most important things that we can talk about besides like self-love and things like that. I think self-care is one of the number one things that we all lack just because our lives are busy. Sometimes we have 50 things to do on our plate and we look at, we're exhausted just thinking about it. So, you know, I think the self-care is really important, and some days, you're able to give yourself more time than others, and then some days you might not, you might forget about it and you've been so busy and then you realize it's been 3 days since you've done something for yourself and now you're in tears, or now you're overly tired, or now you're overly stressed out or overly emotional because of everything that's built up. So I do think it is important to realize those signs and, realize, okay, hey, I need to take a moment and step back and, I need to do something that's going to help me. So I think that's really
Yeah.
important that you mentioned that.
And to not stress yourself out trying to de-stress. Like I've talked
Right.
about that before. And then to also know that like it's not a failure of yours if you hit a place of burnout. Like it's going to happen to all of us multiple
Yeah.
times throughout our life. It doesn't mean that you don't practice self-care. It doesn't mean that you don't take care of yourself enough. Like stuff just piles up sometimes. So I think the more important part of that is if you hit the point of burnout, just be like, okay, this happened. It's
Yeah.
okay, let me take a pause, let me reset. And knowing that, you want to know what coping strategies work for you. I mean, one of the biggest ones I think is knowing your limits and setting your boundaries. Like Jesse mentioned, like we live in such a busier day and age now that having to kind of compartmentalize our day and prioritize our day and set our boundaries is more important now than ever because we just
Yeah.
don't get as much natural mental rest as human beings anymore. So that is super important. And then just like knowing what works for you and knowing that when we're really practicing self-care, when we're really trying to give like good balance to our brains, that one we're gonna mess up sometimes because it
Right.
is really easy to get like a quick hit of like a feel good neurotransmitter from stuff that's not always healthy for you, like junk food or your sleep being dysregulated or smoking or alcohol or things like that. Like they'll give you a real quick hit of that feel good, but it will actually in the long run just cause re-burnout because you're going to get a big spike and then a big depletion of
Yeah.
that neurotransmitter. So, and not to cut yourself, not to be too hard on yourself if we do default to those things. It happens. Sometimes you get overly stressed and you instead of going for a walk or meditating, you have a glass of wine. Don't beat yourself up over that. Just know that like you want to be sure you're then putting in that good stuff for you because it's like, well, this isn't going to actually solve anything. So let me
Right.
make sure I'm then going to add some things that are going to help reset my brain levels to where I need it. And it's different for different people because we want to remember in keeping our brain in balance, it's not so much about what has happened to you, but it's about what emotion came from the events that have the stressors that have been occurring to you. And we want to cope with our emotional response. So that's different for different people, like what regulates you. Like I talk quite often that like I'm a pretty anxious person, and like self-care for a lot of people for anxiousness or anxiety is that like slower stuff, the mindfulness, the meditation, the
Mhm.
stretching, the yoga, where I'm like, ugh, if I'm anxious, no thank you, that is not how I cope. I
Yeah,
have to be like more like energetic, like I need to pace around and I need to vent, and that's what helps me cope with anxiety. And like for me personally, when I am angry, that's when my coping is slower. That's when I'm like, I need to be mindful. I'm going to do some stretching. I'm going to do some yoga. Where for a lot of people, like anger is an emotion where their coping would be more like frenetic, like, like you
yeah,
go run or have a dance party or yell along to some music and stuff. So there's no right or wrong way. It's just learning like what does your body need to feel relaxed or like you can cope through this emotion. That doesn't mean change the emotion. It means feel it, but feel like you can breathe through it.
right.
And then I think
Yeah,
knowing the things like 988, that you can call or text 988 24 hours a day. Again, I know we've said it a lot, but just in case, Via Link, our agency, is a very proud answerer of 988 in Louisiana. And 988 is there for that. You've reached that moment of burnout and you're finding yourself emotional or numbed out or whatever it might be, and you need to talk and you're not sure where to turn to first or what to do about it. Call us. That's what we're going to
yeah,
do. We're going to help you sort out what's been going on, what's been weighing on you, and what's going to help you cope through it. That's why I kind of like to say, like with 988, it's not necessarily for every single caller that you might feel quote unquote better after talking to us because
right.
we can't solve emotions. That's not how our brains work. But you're going to feel like you can breathe through it. And that's what we want. We want you to feel it and we want you to breathe through it and take care of yourself through what is overwhelming you. And
Yeah.
988 is there for that. But sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I was gonna agree with you. I think that's one of the most important things. Like when I was on the call line, it wasn't so much about sometimes finding an answer, like you said, like 9 times out of 10, you don't usually find the solution. But I think when you can process what you're feeling with someone else and someone, that you may not even know, but sometimes it's more helpful than I think people realize. Because I've talked to a lot of people, even when I ran groups, um, on the side with another volunteer thing that I did, and they would just talk about how they felt. I think that is so helpful for people, and like the biggest mis thing about 9 and 8 is that you have to have suicide thoughts to call, or you have to almost attempt it. And I've heard that so many times when I was on the line, like I didn't know I could call this number just to talk. And so I'm glad that we talk about it in every episode as well, because there's people out there that just need someone to listen, or they just need to vent. Like you always say, get the junk out your chest. And yeah, you may not have your answer when you're get off the phone with, a professional trained specialist, but at least you were able to kind of process those thoughts, and that might move you towards having a solution, or it just might make you feel better that you were able to talk about what you were going through without judgment, and talk to somebody real that has empathy, sympathy, and things like that. So I do think 988 work is so important for, both. And what's funny is, some of me and my friends were talking about it one time, is that like sometimes even, if you're the person taking the 988 call, sometimes processing feelings with others kind of helps yourself, because everybody goes through, things. So it's just like sometimes even the person on the other line that's answering the phone, sometimes it's like it works for them, like it's helpful for them, because
Yeah.
they kind of like, because sometimes you bounce ideas or you have a conversation, you're like, well, I was feeling like this and this is what I did. And it's almost like you kind of both help each other out, which is so amazing to have that, because, no one's better than anybody else. Like we're all going through things. So, like you said, we've all experienced burnout. I don't think I know anybody in my life or anybody that's never experienced burnout. So sometimes you can get a caller who's burnt out and you're kind of feeling the same, and then y'all talk about it and you both kind of just like kind of processed it together and kind of just, did it together, which is kind of cool because you get that connection, you're able to help somebody, they're kind of able to help you. It's almost like it's just really cool that feeling. So I like that, we always bring up that you do not have to be in a suicidal crisis. If you are, of course, we're there for it, but we're also there for everything else as well. Like you always say, no problem's too little or too small. Reach out. I think that's the most important thing to always express and bring awareness with 988 because a lot of people just assume you have to be in a crisis, and that's not how it is at all.
And like you said, we're totally there for if it's that
Hmm.
crisis point or this is a very high risk suicide situation. We are absolutely there for that. But you don't have to wait for that. And I think
Right.
as you can hear from like what Jesse was saying, like we want to hear from you. Like
We
there
do.
is no wrong reason for you to call. So don't hesitate. Call or text.
Yes.
I'll forget because I'm old.
I don't think you're old. You're good.
We're like literally the exact same age. So we're both old. I'm just kidding. We're young and vibrant.
Yeah, we're young and living life. We're vibrant.
Okay, I have no idea what I was talking about.
You were talking about how 988 is there, and then before that, you were just talking about self-care and like moving your body and how it looks different for everybody. And just kind of knowing what works for you because just because one thing might work for you might not work for me, so just kind of knowing, like you said, your go-to's and having a couple of different go-to's because sometimes let's say one of your go-to's reading a book and then you sit down to read a book and you're like, I don't feel like it, like I just don't want to do this. So sometimes having backup plan different things, is helpful as well.
Yeah, and just I think paying attention to like what your response is with something that's supposed to be your self-care or your time for yourself. I had that happen to me. I think I was still an intern in grad school with the first agency I was working at. And when I first started working with survivors of suicide loss, and I did the group, our survivors of suicide loss support group that evening. And then I went home. And one of my like go tos when I would go home is to like watch TV. And I was watching Mad Men at the time, rewatching. I was renting the DVDs from the library because I was in school and still couldn't afford to have internet at my house. But so I like put on an episode, but it was an episode where a character attempts and dies by suicide tragically. And I mean, it just wrecked me, even though I'd seen the episode a
Right.
billion times before. But it was like, oh, this is what they mean by that. Like, we have to be deliberate about what we are choosing. I have just like gone through a lot of emotions that evening. It was I don't remember, I guess just like a heavier group that night, which is
Yeah.
totally good. But then that it was like, oh, I needed to be a little bit more deliberate with what I was doing when I got home to take care of myself.
Yeah.
So I think just recognizing and um, yeah, don't stress yourself out. Trying not to be unstressed and don't think that you can be a superhuman who's never going to get burned out because we're all human beings and you can be a superhero, but you can't be a superhuman. We all have very real biological brains that will burn out, and that's
Yeah.
okay. And so I think it's just having that like strength and caring for yourself enough to be able to go, okay, this happened. I need to pause. I need to heal myself a little bit before I keep like trudging along.
I definitely agree. I definitely agree.
Okay. Well, Jesse, you think we've covered it?
I think we did good. I think we put out some good tips and, different things. So I think it's definitely a good episode and I hope it helps a lot of people who do watch it.
Or listen on
Yeah.
whatever streaming platform. I don't know what I'm saying. Not stream. I need to stop talking. This is this is a Monday afternoon, folks. Even though we're posting this on Tuesday, as always, and I don't know what I'm doing anymore. But I love talking with you, Jesse, as always.
Yes, me too.
Oh, that's what we need to do. Our sign off. I was like, there's
Yeah.
something that we do. Okay. This is embarrassing. Okay. Are you ready, Jesse?
Yeah, I'm ready.
This is obviously some very real talk with Jesse and Sharon.
No
No
filters,
filters, no
no
fluff,
fluff, just
just
real
real
talk.
talk. All right, everybody take care.
Bye, guys. Until next time.